So far this week, we've been following that last week of Christ on earth. And earlier we had what I called a flashback. And the flashback was to that dinner at Bethany, which took place a day or two before the Palm Sunday ride. Today, Wednesday, by contrast, we have a flash forward. It's a flash forward by just one day, but it's also to a dinner. It's a flash forward to the Last Supper. John 13, 21 to 32. At what proved to be his Last Supper, Christ is troubled in spirit. And why? Because he knows that one of his close band, one of the inner 12 disciples, is going to hand him over to those who want to get rid of him, to dispose of him. And he knows who it's going to be, even though the rest of his disciples don't. It's going to be Judas, and Jesus has been reading Judas Iscariot for a long time, even before that other dinner at Bethany, when he self-righteously objected to Mary's gesture of unbounded love. Now, Peter presses Jesus through his friend John the disciple to tell him who it is. And Jesus quietly indicates to them that he means Judas. He does it by passing Judas a piece of bread. Judas also is deeply troubled in spirit, and he abruptly gets up and leaves. Do what you will, Jesus says to him, and I don't think he says it bitterly. He says it with deep sadness and with an acceptance that Judas is set on his course. Because Judas has steeled himself to go through with the betrayal, and he has steeled himself to do that even though he has been part of the most intimate, the most highly charged meal that Christ ever shared. Tomorrow, Thursday, we're going to hear the life-changing and the faith-changing depth of that meal and what took place. But today, what Judas is going to do feels like blasphemy. And yet, when he had left, and remember that most of the disciples assumed that it was just treasurer's business, but Peter and John knew the worst. When he'd left, Christ turned to them all and said, "It's now that you will see glory. It's now that you'll see the glory of God, even in my betrayal. You'll see the glory of God in me betrayed." Since I was a child, I have never ceased to be moved by one of the simplest of hymns. Sometimes it's called a children's hymn, but it's for all of us. Here are just 3 of its verses. It is a thing most wonderful, almost too wonderful to be, that God's own Son should come from heaven and die to save a child like me. But even could I see him die, I could but see a little part of that great love, which like a fire is always burning in his heart. And yet I want to love thee, Lord. Oh, light the flame within my heart, and I will love thee more and more, until I see thee as thou art.